Hello, I'm Mark, and this is In the Round, On-Armature Bust Tutorial Series, Part 2, Materials, Tools, and Recommended Resources. When undertaking a bust, or any sculpture really, the first question you're going to have to answer is what material or materials you want to use. Some would argue that this is the most important choice in art, because it will inform all subsequent decisions and play a large role in determining not only the form your work takes, but its contextual significance. This decision is influenced by pragmatic factors, such as what the materials cost, their availability, their ease of use, their toxicity, and the like. Formal factors, what the materials look like, or smell, or sound, or feel, or taste like, I suppose. And conceptual factors, what the materials mean in the context of their histories. For these videos, I'll be using fireable water-based clay, or ceramic, specifically a low-grog mid-fire stoneware. This kind of clay is widely available pre-mixed from art, craft, and ceramic supply stores. Water-based clays are one of the two primary plastic sculpting materials, the other being oil-based clays, sometimes known as plasticine or plastiline. By plastic, I mean pliable clay or clay-like materials used for additive sculpting, as opposed to rigid materials like wood or stone used for subtractive carving. Although there are many other plastic options you might consider, including epoxy clays, polymer clays, air-dry clays, waxes, or even plaster if you use a cure retarder. All of these are, for a variety of technical and sculptural reasons, less desirable than water and oil clays. If, however, you are interested in using any of them, and there are sometimes good reasons to do so, the sculptural principles I cover in this series will still apply, and there will be some transferable techniques, but the sculptural feel will be very different. So what are the differences between water and oil-based clays that might lead you to choose one over the other? Well, the major advantage of oil-based clays is that they don't dry out, while the major advantage of water-based clays is that they do. Oil-based clays are made of clay particles suspended in a mixture of wax and oil, and sometimes other materials like sulfur. Because it doesn't dry out, you don't have to worry about controlling its moisture content by wrapping it or wetting it or force drying it, nor does it shrink as water clays do when they dry. Oil clays come in a variety of hardnesses and have a relatively narrow range of consistencies based on temperature. That is, cold oil clay will be harder, warmer clay more pliant. In general, oil clays are more difficult to move than water clays, and so unless you want to damage your hands, you'll rely more on tools than your fingers to shape it. Consequently, working in oil clay tends to involve more subtractive techniques than working in water clay. The primary disadvantage of oil clay is that it cannot be made permanent directly, and so must be cast in another material if you want to keep it. Note that although oil clays containing sulfur tend to have a better working consistency, which is why it's there, they also have a distinct and off-putting aroma, and furthermore, the sulfur can interfere with the curing of some types of silicone. Water-based clays are mixtures of clay particles and other materials suspended in water. Although people have been using naturally occurring clays for at least 30,000 years, and probably more, most modern clays are specifically formulated for features like color, translucency, hardness, or heat resistance. There are infinite varieties of these formulations, but the defining feature of all of them is that they can be fired to become ceramic. Whereas unfired clay can be rendered down in water and reconstituted, see The Remains of the Clay, my video on reclaiming dry clay, fired ceramic is a permanent material. Clays are typically grouped by the temperatures to which they're fired, either low-fired earthenwares or mid to high-fire stonewares. The specifics here are not overly important, save to say that you don't want to overfire your clay or it will melt. So double-check its temperature before putting it in the kiln. The fact that you can fire water clay to make it permanent is its biggest practical advantage over oil-based clays, because it eliminates the need to make a mold of the sculpture and cast it in another material, although you can, of course, do this as well if you choose. The biggest sculptural advantage of water clay is the wide range of consistencies it goes through as it dries. This, in turn, permits a much wider range of sculptural techniques than are possible in oil clay. Oil clay is like a 2-octave keyboard to water clay's full piano. That water clay dries does mean you have to be careful to control its moisture content throughout the sculpt. Get it too wet, and details can render down into slip. Let it dry too fast, and you won't be able to effectively build up an articulate form, or easily remove the sculpture from its armature to fire it. For more on moisture control, see my video wrapping up. Furthermore, water clay shrinks both as it dries and when it's fired, usually by about 10 to 15%, so you have to compensate for the shrinkage if you want a life-size bust. But these are minor problems and easily managed. They are, for me, more than made up for by water clay's versatility. The choice of tools can be deeply personal for some artists. Many are what you might call tool fetishists. Others would rather use their hands as much as possible. I'm more of the latter persuasion, preferring the unmediated feedback that touch affords. However, there are some things that hands simply cannot do, and for these, tools are necessary. Furthermore, overuse of your hands can lead to a host of physical ailments like carpal tunnel and epicondylitis, which is a persuasive argument for favoring tools. As you can see, I've collected quite a few, and these are far from all I own. The following are the basic tools you will need to sculpt a bust in waterclay. Loop tools, small, medium, and large. I like to have at least one serrated loop. Note that these are ribbon tools made from a strip of metal with a sharpened knife-like edge, not wire loops with a round profile. A selection of compression tools, wood, metal, and rubber. I particularly like the color shaper tools. A needle tool can also be useful for both compression and detail carving. Ribs, flexible metal and rubber, smooth and serrated. Plastic Bondo spreaders are a good, inexpensive alternative to ceramics-specific silicone ribs. A throwing sponge and abrasion tools, including scouring pads and/or reticulated foam. This triangle of foam was cut off a 3-foot gutter insert. Inexpensive flat brushes, stiff coarse bristle brushes for abrasive shaping, and smooth medium flex brushes for surfacing. A soft fan brush can be useful too. A short, stiff-bladed, serrated knife. This one costs $5 from a home goods store. A 12-inch or larger turntable. A bucket and spray bottle. 12-inch or larger sculptural calipers. An 18-inch or larger ruler or square. A translucent ruler can also be useful. A clamp light. And cloths and plastic for wrapping. When studying the figure, there are two types of texts you'll want to consider owning: anatomical references and books on sculptural technique. As I covered in my introduction, familiarity with anatomical structures is necessary for effective figure sculpting, even when sculpting highly stylized or abstracted figures. The reference you choose matters less than that you have one. For many years, I used an anatomical text I found in a bargain bin at a used bookstore. The standard, however, is Stephen Peck's Atlas of Human Anatomy for the Artist from 1951. A much more recent series of anatomy books that I quite like are these by Oldis Zarins: Anatomy for Sculptors, The Anatomy of Facial Expression. There are several others. These texts include not only the expected photographs and illustrations, but digital sculptures and 3D scans of models. I highly recommend them. One final resource worth mentioning is humanbiodigital.com, an online 3D anatomical model excellent for both reference and study. When it comes to sculptural technique, the classic text is Edward Lenterre's Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure, originally published in 2 volumes in 1902 and 1904. This is the book I and countless other figure sculptors learned from. In almost all ways, it is the best book on sculptural technique available, and for that reason, I would recommend it to all aspiring figure sculptors. Sadly, however, I must mention that it contains a brief passage that is profoundly objectionable. It makes the error of using generalized physiological differences between races, which is itself a problematic proposition to begin with, to explain generalized differences in intellect and temperament between races. I think you can see where this is going. If you choose to forego Lenterre for this reason, a contemporary series worth seeking out is Philippe Fourreau's. He has books on figure sculpting and portrait sculpting, all of which are quite good. And there you have it, the materials, tools, and references you'll need to start sculpting your bust. Join me next time for part 3, where we will be constructing our armature.